Good evening. Welcome to Free Law School. My name is Gregory Swafford, and we're going to be talking about why most businesses are built backwards. That's our conversation. And whether or not your business provides you with the level of limited liability protection that you think it does, or are you actually exposed personally because your name appears on the business. That's what we're going to get into. Why most businesses are built backwards. And look, let's start out with this. Most businesses don't fail because of money. Most businesses fail because of structure. They fail because the structure doesn't survive under pressure. And the problem right now is that the entire conversation online and on social media has hijacked the conversation regarding business structure. Everybody's online talking about business structure is about credit funding, business structure is about how to get grants, or business structure is focused primarily on tax strategy or tax tricks. Those are all tactics. That's not business structure. The conversation of business structure is about one thing, about whether or not your business survives under pressure. And when I say pressure, I mean the lawsuit, the employee dispute, contract dispute, litigation. That's when the business structure is tested. It's not tested during calm periods. It is only tested when the pressure event arrives. And the businesses encounter institutions that are looking to make that determination on a daily basis. Those institutions are anything from banks, courts, insurance underwriters, investors. Maybe you built something that someone is interested in purchasing. You built it to be able to exit. Well, the acquiring party, as well as the courts, the banks, insurance underwriters, they all have their own set of rules. But they share one thing in common. And that commonality is that they're all trying to make a determination as to whether or not, under pressure, they're all seeking to make a determination as to whether or not the business is independent of the owner. They don't know anything about the owner, but they all share that one thing in common. They're all trying to make a determination as to whether or not the business is independent of the owner or whether the business is dependent upon the owner. Now, many business owners believe the mistaken belief that formation, starting an LLC or a corporation gives you limited liability protection, that's actually structure. That's one of the biggest lies slash misconceptions in business. Business formation does not provide protection. The other misconception, paperwork provides protection. I've represented many business owners over the years, and I can't tell you how many believe that they have business structure or that their business structure is proper merely because they have a manila folder with paperwork in it. Maybe today it's not the proverbial manila folder. I know we've gone digital with everything, but you get my drift, right? Paperwork is not protection. Paperwork and formation only provides the container. That's the purpose for that. It provides the container from which you operate your business. There is no protection there. When you get those documents from the Secretary of State's office, whether they're articles of incorporation or articles of organization, there is no stamp on it that says that you are herefore officially protected. Nothing. It doesn't exist. And the reason is because the container only provides an opportunity for protection. When you form the business, all you've done is satisfied the minimum requirements necessary in order to be recognized by the system. That's it. That's what you did. You are now recognized by the system. You are legible in the system. Now, whether or not you are able to benefit from limited liability protection when that lawsuit, when that pressure event, partnership conflict, employee dispute, regulator audit, investor due diligence, that's going to depend on how you move once that container is established, because limited liability protection is conditional. It is conditioned upon the business behavior going forward from the formation. Remember back in grade school or college or wherever you want to go, because it all worked the same. First day of school, we all start out with an A average. Think about it like that. We all start with an A average. From a business structure standpoint, once we're formed and we have that container, we have a clean slate. There is no classification of the business as independent or, as we say, separate. That's the term. That's what you want to be. You want to be separate from your business. You want to separate yourself personally from any business risk from the beginning. Now, when we start and the business has that container and forms, the very first act performed by the business begins to send out a signal. We're sending out signals with each business transaction that takes place. And most business owners are not even conscious of what's going on because everything is calm. There is no pressure. So what do I mean by sending out a business signal? Let's say that you form a contract, and one of the first transactions of the business is to execute that contract and begin to provide those services. Well, how's the contract signed? Is it signed on behalf of the business, by the owner, or is it merely signed by the owner? That sends out a signal. If it was signed by the owner, if it was signed by on behalf of the business, excuse me, if it was signed on behalf of the business by the owner, then the signal is separate. But if the owner was caught up in his or her exuberance and signed the contract in their own name, mistakenly believing that he or she was signing on behalf of the company, then that signature sends out a signal of personal. Now, imagine over the years, you're operating, as many business owners do. You're operating transaction here, transaction there, each transaction, each act sending out signals, creating a history. That's basically what we're doing. We're creating a history because remember, the structure does not get tested until there's a pressure event. As long as things are calm, revenue's flowing, nobody is suing, everything is good. To the business owner, to the operator, it seems like structure is in place and is working. It's got no reason to believe that it's not. But all of those signals out there are accumulating. Mistakenly signed in a personal capacity. That signal said personal. Maybe did a personal guarantee on a loan. That's personal. Even if we begin signing contracts by the business, it's inconsistent. Sometimes there are assets being used in the business that are titled in a personal name. So there are all of these mixed signals going on out there. And again, they're cumulative over the years. That's how the classification happens. And when the pressure event arrives and a determination has to be made by whatever the institution is, if it's a bank, maybe you go in and you apply for a loan. The bank is looking at the same thing that all of the other institutions are looking at. Is this business separate from the owner? Does the business operate independently of the owner, or is the business dependent upon the owner? And the thing about it is that there is no separate or distinct behavior when it comes to the classification by either of those institutions. They're all looking at the same behavior. This is not about law. It's not about jurisdictions. We're talking about behavior. Business structure is about behavior. Remember, it's not paperwork. It's behavior. We talked about most businesses being built backwards. Let's examine what that looks like. Imagine your entire business life. No, your entire financial life. Imagine your entire financial life being plugged into a single power strip. You have your home, income, your business, bank accounts. Everything is tied into that one power strip. And when you form the LLC, now your personal life and your business life are entangled or tied into that same strip. So imagine again that a power surge happens. So when the surge hits the strip, everything plugged into it is exposed. Everything. There's no separation at that point. You can't go pulling things out at that point. So one pressure event has the potential of exposing personal assets as well as business assets. So here's how the backwards build happened. It happened because most business owners do not give consideration as to whether or not assets or how assets and risk should be separated. That's crucial. Giving thought and taking action to separate personal assets from business risk. So, going back to the power strip, at that time, all of the personal assets should have been unplugged. Once that business, once that LLC or the corporation was formed and plugged into the outlet, then all of the personal assets should have been unplugged. Or at a minimum, the LLC or the corporation was plugged into its own outlet, singularly, by itself. That's the separation that is necessary in order to avoid. Now, what does that separation look like? It's a layered separation. If you didn't give much thought or any thought as to whether or not assets and risk should be separated, then it's not even presumptive to say that your business was built backwards, because there can be no separation. If you form that one entity, the LLC or the corporation, and everything is there, all of your assets, whether they're business assets or you're operating the business and using personal assets in the business, everything is still there at that operating company level. Those are the assets. Now, here's where the risk is. The risk is also right there at the operating company level. That's the public facing entity. You open the doors every day, invite customers in, the logistics, you're moving things around, transportation, you're moving people, whatever your business is. If you own a bakery, if it's a salon, if it's a med spa, if you're a flipper, it doesn't matter. This applies across the board. All of your assets live in that operating company with the risk. That means that everything is exposed. There is no separation there. And we can go back and we can visit, we can visit the state, the Secretary of State's office. We're going to see you there as sole member, member manager. If it's an LLC, if it's a corporation, there you have it, shareholder, officer, director. And let me say this, there's always a lot of debate about whether or not it's better to form an LLC or a corporation from a protection standpoint. For the purposes of limited liability protection, there is no distinction. There is no distinction. Limited liability protection has the same meaning whether you're operating a corporation or an LLC. Again, when you form, all you have is a container and the opportunity to secure that protection based upon how you move going forward. What do those transactions look like? Are they done on behalf of the business or are they done personally? And it doesn't matter whether doing it personally was inadvertent, negligent, doesn't matter. But the corporation, that's a big misconception. It does not provide any greater protection when we're talking about limited liability. And again, online, social media, everywhere, there is so much bad information out there about that. It's everywhere. I was listening to someone a day or so passing through the feed, and they were talking about forming a corporation. And if you form a corporation, you're not only going to get these substantial or significant tax benefits, but you're also, in the event that injury, harm, or the liability is placed on the business, you're not going to be responsible if you have a corporation. That is not true. It's not carte blanche. It doesn't work like that. It is still going to be determined on whether or not you separated yourself properly from the business. Shareholders, particularly in what we call closely held corporations. In closely held corporations where there are 1 to 5 shareholders, you're still there doing everything on a daily. And that's okay if you're separated properly. If you have ownership separated from control, separated from assets and operation, it's okay. But that, in many instances, creates a problem for people because they're not aware that they need to operate separately from the business, that it's not automatic, that just because you form the business, you're not automatically protected. And because you have a corporation, you're not going to be safe in the event that liability is imposed on the corporation and there was no separation. If you were there basically operating in a personal capacity, courts look at that and institutions look at that as the individual operating in a different name. Think about that for a second. What they see is they only see the individual there, you, Mr. or Mrs. Business Owner, operating with a different name. Maybe your last name has Inc. on it now, or company, or co, whatever you chose, LLC, but it's still you. And look, these institutions, they know that nothing's perfect. Nothing's perfect. And there are going to be situations in which things happen. And business owners have to step up and step into the gap and keep things afloat. It happens. Those are called situationals. once or twice, okay. Maybe the conclusion is that those are noise events or coincidental. But when the behavior begins to leave patterns, remember those signals? When that behavior begins to leave patterns, and those patterns are saying personal as opposed to separate, and the patterns become repetitive, because again, nothing's perfect. They understand that things happen. But when those patterns become repetitive, the institution is going to look at the repetition and they're going to make their classification as to whether or not the business is separate or whether the business is personal. And the importance of that classification is the placement of liability. That's really what they're getting to. Who's responsible? Who's going to be responsible if there's liability? That's at the courthouse. If we're talking about the bank, think about it like this. Credit score. Let's use a credit score, for instance, or as an example. Credit scores are based upon cumulative financial behavior or transactions. You buy something on credit, you make your payments on time, so the story goes. It creates a history. Your credit score, that's analogous to the business structure classification. That credit score, good, bad, it's made over time. It comes from accumulation of activity. It's the same with the business classification. Regardless of what institution it's coming from, it's the same. They're looking at history. All of the institutions, particularly the courts, they live in the past. When they're making the classification, they don't ask for clarification. There is none. You can't talk about or explain what you was going to do or what the plans are for the future. Nobody cares. They're limited in scope, and the scope is what has already taken place. That's what they're looking at. The banks, for instance, we know what the courts do. They want to know who was in control, who had the authority to make the decisions, how did the money move. Those are questions that they want to answer in order to make the determination as to whether or not the business was operating independently. If the owner was there signing everything, making all of the decisions in a personal capacity, when problems arose, they stepped in and resolved those issues or absorbed the risk in a personal capacity, injected cash into the business when there was slowdowns, then they're going to classify that business as personal. Maybe you've heard the phrase before, piercing the corporate veil. That's how that happens. That's the analysis that the courts go through in making that determination. and coming to the conclusion that the business owner is simply the alter ego of the business. That means that it's just you with the different name, that you are the business and vice versa. And so in that instance, liability is placed upon the business owner in a personal capacity. Now, imagine going to the bank. Same behavior. Remember what I said a minute ago. All of these institutions are looking at the same behavior. So when you apply for the loan at the bank sends you out a list of documents that they want. But they're not making the loan based upon those documents. They're looking for information. They're trying to glean how that business moves. Who controls the money? What happens if something goes wrong? Who's going to be responsible for the repayment? That's what the bank wants to know. And they're going to look to get that information from those documents, not from what the business owner states. And if you're already banking or doing business at the financial institution that you're applying for a loan, they get a backstage view into the business behavior. They get to see whether or not the business is generating revenues on its own, or whether or not the business owner is injecting personal cash to keep things afloat, whether or not there's a mixing of personal funds and business funds. That's how they determine whether or not the business operates independently of the owner, or whether the business is dependent upon the owner. And when they make that determination, they're going to protect themselves. That's the purpose. And how do they do that? That's when the business owner, the applicant, may be requested to make a personal guarantee. Or maybe the interest rate is higher, or the term shorter, or in some instances, credit denied. If the bank feels that the business can't survive on its own, and they're looking at the same business behavior. The investor. The investor doesn't want to invest in paperwork. They're investing in control. Can the business operate independently of the owner? What happens if the owner steps away? Does everything collapse? Those are all the things. And again, guys, look, I know it's a lot. I want you to understand that those conversations that you're hearing on social media and online, those are not real. That's not business structure. Business structure is about protection, about whether or not one pressure event is going to bring everything down. Limiting your liability under pressure. That's the purpose of business structure. Now, I'm not saying that those things are bad in and of themselves, but to me, those tactics, if you will, they are or strategies, if you want to call them strategies. Those things are optimizations. But remember this, if the structure isn't in place, if the foundation isn't in place, then adding any of those things to the container is only creating more exposure. Because there, even those things, there is a responsibility to steward and maintain those things. You don't just get them and everybody looks away. You're still responsible for them. If your structure is leaking, then those things are going to leak right out. So when we're optimizing, it only works if we took the time to put things in the proper order. Order matters. And I know this conversation isn't for everybody. If you've been operating for a while, but here's the beautiful part about it. If you've been operating for a while and there you don't have a pressure event, then it's the perfect time to step back, evaluate your structure, and fix it. The absolute best time, if you're getting ready to launch something, I know a lot of you guys do your due diligence and you doing your thing online and listening and studying. If that's you, the best time to put your structure in place is in the beginning, before the first dollar arrives, and certainly before any risk arrives. That's the best time. There's a lot of bad information and advice out there. Well, why would you want to go and worry about structure or spend money on structure and you haven't even made a dollar yet? Just wait until the business starts to make money. Wait until the business is profitable. All of those things constitute bad advice. It's bad advice from a basic business level. Because once the pressure event shows up, and remember what I said earlier, if you're just joining, business structure is tested under pressure. You can make money, for all the guys who are scaling and revenue is growing and everything is good. Many of you are exposed. It's just that you haven't found yourself in the midst of a pressure event yet. That's all it is. It always feels good. It always will feel good until the pressure event arrives. That's when you get tested. That's when your structure gets tested. But if you wait, if you take the I'll circle back mentality or strategy, and the pressure event arrives and you're at mid-circle, you're not all the way back yet, now you have a problem. And there's the potential for your personal life and your business life to collide, AKA personal assets and business assets both at risk at the same time. And how you make out is going to be very much determined by the extent or amount of the liability, meaning how much you're going to have to sell off or have seized in order to satisfy the judgment if you don't readily pay the judgment. I had a call a couple of months ago. I was doing a live event, and I had someone reach out, and explained he had been doing business for a number of years. Was in the construction trade. Had been doing business for a number of years, and found himself um, embattled in two lawsuits. Two lawsuits. One lawsuit had come to a final judgment. One lawsuit had come to a final judgment. He was insured. His insurer tendered the policy limits of $500,000. But there was a second claim that was still pending. That action had not concluded. And he said that the anticipation was that the judgment was going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $300,000. But remember, the insurance company has already tendered policy limits. So there's no more money from an insurance standpoint. Now we're talking about business assets and personal assets. And the thing that was causing the consternation and sleeplessness in this individual was that there was no separation. This conversation about business structure being more than formation or paperwork, this was all new to this individual. It was new. All that time, he thought that he was protected until he found himself in the middle of this battle. And so the question was, as it frequently is, and again, this is for educational purposes only, guys. This is not meant to create an attorney-client relationship, nor does it create an attorney-client relationship. But that question is frequently asked because most business owners, they skip the structure part up front. It seems like a distraction. You just kind of want to get to let's do some business. Let's generate some revenue. Let's find a contract, send a bill to somebody. Later for the structure, we'll come back. So there was no structure. And the question is always, can I move things around now? Can I put my structure in place now? There's before the judgment goes down, or the only thing that's happened to this point is that I received a letter, or I'm being threatened, or this or that. Well, in most of those instances, if assets are moved at that time or after those events begin to occur, the courts are eventually going, when we're talking about the court, that particular institution, they're going to unwind that transaction as a fraudulent transfer. That happens everywhere. That's not just in 1 or 2 or 10 particular places. That happens everywhere. If you transfer during any of those events, they're going to bring it back as fraudulent. And the fraud is that they 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 believe that the whole purpose behind the movement or transaction is to defraud the creditor or the claimant. That's why it's brought back. So, but here's the great part. Back to the people who are already operating and have no pressure events occurring right now. You can structure without starting anything all over. Everything runs as is, and you put the proper layering in place. So, what does that look like? That looks like ownership being separated from control and assets being separate from the operating company. You know, the thing that you guys see online all day, every day, own nothing, control everything. Well, that's what it looks like from a business structure standpoint. Your name is not on it. The operating company, whether it is an LLC or a corporation, owns nothing. It should be broke, to use that word. It should own nothing of value or very little, if anything. And so that's the setup. But again, that's only the paperwork part of it. Many business owners have paperwork. Guys and ladies are out there all day, every day, Googling and AIing and doing all these things, creating paperwork. But the paperwork is not the protection. The protection is the behavior. The protection is paperwork that supports the relationships between the entities. Because remember, if you find yourself, and we're talking about that institution that most of you guys revere, primarily the court. If we're there, you need documentation to support the movement. So, what does that look like? And the other side is there trying to demonstrate or making the claim or argument to the court that your structure is a sham. It's just paperwork. It's just you with a different name, with Inc. or Co. Company, LLC, LLP, whatever. But it's you. That's the argument that they're making. And so now it becomes the responsibility of the business owner to demonstrate that these actions or activities were actually based in separation between the business owner and the business. If the ownership is separated, then and it's operated and documented properly, the classification is going to be separate. If your name is not on the business, then there can be no personal liability. Only the person that caused the harm is going to be responsible for the harm. If your name wasn't on the business, then you're not going to be personally responsible for the harm. All other things being consistent. The separation, not mixing personal and business assets, not signing in a personal capacity. If you're able to navigate all of those activities, then you're going to be safe personally because the ownership is separated, it's layered. There's a layer between the ownership and the operations. Now, that saves the personal assets. What about the business assets? What happens to those? Again, many business owners are out there every day, all day, operating the business, and those business assets are titled in the name of the operating company, that LLC. Some business owners operating the business with personal assets. I can't tell you the number of landlords that I've come across who rent multiple properties out to tenants, and those properties are titled in their personal names. How are we even able to make an argument of separate without being laughed at? And the laughter is not the worst part. The worst part is the liability being imposed upon the individual after the laughter subsides. We need to be aware, and that's what these conversations are about, creating awareness. Now, it's not for everybody. I know some of the things that you probably heard tonight might be a bit uncomfortable, but again, there is light at the end of the tunnel because most business owners are not involved in pressure events at the moment. If you're not involved in a pressure event, it is the time for you to evaluate your business and commit to putting the proper structure in place. You only have to do it one time. But if you don't, everything is exposed. What about the individuals who are operating? Maybe you know them, operating multiple enterprises out of one operating company. The proverbial jack of all trades. He's got the barbershop, owns the strip, he's got tenants next door, runs the shop, he's got the cafe, the coffee spot. Everything's there. One LLC, Big Man Enterprises, LLC. If someone takes a fall on one of those floors, everything is at play. Everything is exposed. That's how it works. Everything is exposed. So again, awareness is one thing. What you do with that awareness after, that's a totally different decision. And that's why I have these conversations to create that level of awareness. And it's not for everybody, but the persons that I know that this information is going to move, those are people that I call the pro sepreneurs. I refer to as pro sepreneurs. It's a movement. Many business owners want to be able to account for their own structural literacy. They want to understand the environment in which the business is operating for themselves. Doesn't mean that they want to act as their own lawyer, but they do want to take responsibility for understanding how to move on a daily basis. Because even if you do have counsel or if you engage counsel prior to forming your business, they don't go home with you, or they don't go to the office or to the shop with you to run the business every day. And in my 30 plus years of doing this as an attorney and representing small business owners, I'm keenly aware of the things that the business owner can do for his or herself. And many of you guys are already taking on major responsibility. Besides experts in whatever operations you're doing, you need to understand structure. And so it's not a big reflection that needs to occur if all you have is that LLC. If you formed the business backwards, if you didn't realize at the time that you formed your business that assets and risk should have been separated, then you have exposure. You have exposure. I created a structural exposure check for those who may have done a little bit more than just creating an LLC or a corporation and all of their assets being in one place. If that's not you, if you're operating and you have some layered structure, I created a 5-point structural exposure check so that you can test the structural health of your business. Takes about 5 to 7 minutes to do so. There's a link in the description to my social media accounts. Click on one of the links there and comment check. And we're going to send you the link to the structural exposure check. And if you want to have a conversation with me after that point about business structure or about what it would take in order to put a layering, separation of ownership, control, assets, and operations in place in your business, then send me a message. Take the check, and then send me a message. And we'll jump on a call and see whether or not it's a fit. I appreciate you guys joining the conversation tonight. I hope that it's been helpful and enlightening. And I'll see you on the next conversation. And thank you for joining the Prosapreneur Network.